a sealed envelope, a lone whisper in the corridor, and a stunned silence in the Queen's private quarters. When a royal instruction long buried and tightly guarded finally surfaced, it didn't just rattle the foundations of Buckingham Palace, it detonated them. Why was Catherine the only one named? And who knew about it all along? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began with a single line in a classified inventory, noticed by a junior archivist during what was expected to be a routine handover of documents. The phrase "private instruction to be opened upon succession complications" was innocuous at first glance, but what followed was anything but. Hidden in a red leather-bound folder sealed with the Queen's personal crest, the document emerged without fanfare, but the storm it unleashed was immediate. Palace aides, typically composed and unfazed by protocol, were seen darting through corridors and cancelling scheduled appearances. Meetings were called without explanation. Something was very wrong. What turned unease into panic was the content of the instruction itself. Catherine was named, and she alone. There was no mention of Camilla, Queen Consort by title, nor of Princess Anne, whose decades of tireless service had earned her quiet reverence within royal circles. The silence in the document echoed loudly in the halls of power. The wording was direct, unmistakable. Entrust the responsibility of sovereign preparation solely to the Princess of Wales. There was no ambiguity, and there was no time to soften the blow. Behind closed doors, the reaction was volcanic. While public smiles were maintained for the cameras behind the velvet curtains, whispers turned to accusations. How had this instruction remained hidden for so long? Who had kept it buried, and why was it surfacing now? Theories exploded among senior royals. Some suspected a deliberate leak, others feared a rogue aide had taken matters into their own hands. The weight of the document could not be overstated. It wasn't merely a personal opinion, it was an instruction, a final word from the monarch whose legacy still loomed large. King Charles was reportedly blindsided. Caught between tradition and the inescapable truth of the Queen's final command, he found himself grappling with a dilemma no ruler wants: challenge his mother's dying wish, or undermine his wife's authority. Meanwhile, Prince William appeared conflicted, composed in public, but noticeably shaken when caught off guard by photographers during a private outing. The world was watching, but none more closely than Catherine, whose subtle shift in posture during a recent engagement was not lost on those who study royal behavior with obsession. She smiled graciously, of course, but those closest to her saw it, a spark of uncertainty, perhaps even burden. The tension was no longer speculative. It was real, and it was growing by the hour. While aides scrambled to contain the leak and control the press fallout, the core of the monarchy faced a question it had not prepared for. What if the Queen's final act was not to preserve unity, but to ignite a battle for it? But to understand the weight of this document, we must travel back to the quiet days before Queen Elizabeth's final breath and the secret promise only a few dared witness. Hidden behind layers of protocol and silence was a final act of legacy. Queen Elizabeth, frail but resolute, penned one last instruction, one that would bypass titles, traditions, and even bloodlines. And she named only one woman, Catherine. Why? In her final years, Queen Elizabeth drew noticeably closer to Catherine, not simply out of affection, but from a calculated trust forged in private moments and guarded glances. While others clung to ceremony, Catherine listened. Where others jostled for relevance, she remained steady, undistracted by the noise. Insiders began to whisper that the Queen saw something of herself in the Duchess of Cambridge, a quiet resolve, a loyalty unshaken by scandal or spotlight. That bond was said to have crystallized during a solitary Balmoral retreat, where the Queen summoned Catherine for an unscheduled walk across the grounds. No aides, no press, just two women generations apart, sharing something no one else could witness. What was exchanged remains a mystery, but by the time they returned, the Queen's decision had already begun to take shape. What many didn't see or chose not to see was the Queen's growing disillusionment with those closest to her. After decades of navigating palace intrigue, she had come to see the fractures forming within her circle. Betrayals cloaked in civility, agendas masquerading as tradition. Even within her own family, trust was in short supply. One insider confessed the Queen privately referred to certain advisors as actors in velvet masks. These weren't just petty disagreements, they were deep-seated fractures, and they shook her. So she turned inward and planned in silence. According to a former royal archivist, the Queen requested a private audience with her most senior aide and the chief keeper of the royal archives. No announcement, no record on the court circular. Inside her study, she allegedly handwrote the instruction, declining to dictate or allow anyone to transcribe it. It was her voice, her hand, her final stamp of authority. She placed it into a sealed envelope and insisted it be stored with the highest discretion, a document to be opened only when the transition required clarity. Its contents stunned those few who were permitted a glance. There was no grand declaration, no list of names to be considered. There was only one: Catherine. The Queen's language was unmistakable. The future, she wrote, demanded grace over title, endurance over entitlement. The absence of Camilla's name wasn't lost on anyone, nor was the exclusion of Anne, who had stood beside the Queen in duty for decades. These omissions weren't oversights. They were intentional silences that spoke volumes. Why did the Queen make this choice? Was it foresight, intuition, or perhaps a silent protest against the machinations unfolding around her? Whatever the reason, she did not leave the decision to chance. It was personal, it was deliberate, and it was irreversible. The moment she sealed that envelope, the monarchy's center of gravity began to shift slowly, quietly, but undeniably. As the Queen faded, her secret remained dormant until a hidden trigger set events in motion no one could stop. Not even the highest-ranking royals enter the Queen's personal archive without cause. But when the key changed hands and the safe cracked open, the contents sparked more than curiosity. They unleashed chaos. What else had the Queen hidden? The Queen's personal archive had always been treated as sacred ground, an untouchable vault of private papers, sealed mementos, and royal reflections that even seasoned courtiers dared not approach without explicit consent. For decades, it remained locked behind not just reinforced steel, but layers of unspoken reverence. It was only to be accessed during what was vaguely referred to as a specific succession moment, a phrase that was deliberately undefined until now. That moment had arrived. A change in internal leadership triggered the archival protocols, and suddenly, a dusty, unmarked key found its match in a corner of the Queen's private study. No one could have predicted what he'd find. It wasn't the contents of the archive that sent shockwaves, it was how they were discovered. According to internal sources, an anonymous tip reached the master of the household, urging them to look beneath the first drawer. Hesitant but compelled, a small team was dispatched. What they uncovered was not part of any known royal index. A singular chest, long sealed and encased in velvet wrapping, bore the Queen's crest and a label in her own handwriting, to be read privately. The weight of that phrase alone sent an immediate chill through the room. This was no ceremonial artifact, it was a message. When the chest was opened, silence fell. There, atop a carefully folded pile of notes, lay the instruction, her final, unspoken command. But it didn't stand alone. Surrounding it were pages that seemed almost surreal. Sketches of crowns, flowcharts with initials, handwritten phrases repeating the word future, and one detail that could not be denied, the name Catherine circled in royal ink. And just beneath it, in the Queen's unmistakable script, the words, "The one I trust with the future." The room shifted from discovery to panic in seconds. Aides exchanged glances, some horrified, others intrigued. It was clear that whatever message the Queen had encoded here, it had never been intended for general eyes. An immediate attempt was made to lock the chest once more, to silence the breach and walk backward from what had just been exposed. But it was too late. One document had already been photographed. A whisper had already escaped into the air. The Queen's final intention, once a hidden thought, was now a ticking fuse. Suddenly, the archival chamber became ground zero for a palace-wide reckoning. Meetings were convened, crisis protocols were enacted. But there was no unseeing what had been read. This wasn't just the Queen's preference, it was a planned move, deeply symbolic, and impossible to spin. Catherine had not been passively elevated, she had been directly chosen. And now, as the news crept through the corridors and slipped into conversations behind closed doors, the question, echoing louder than any other, was no longer how it was, why. The palace scrambled for damage control, but one thing was clear: Catherine had been chosen. And now everyone wanted to know, for what? In the aftermath of the instructions unveiling, insiders say Camilla's fury echoed through Clarence's house. One aide called it the day the portrait cracked. As Catherine remained silent, Camilla confronted Charles and made an ultimatum no one expected. For years, Camilla had climbed the treacherous mountain of public perception, reshaping her image from controversial figure to queen consort. She had endured whispers, headlines, and frosty receptions. But nothing prepared her for this. When the instruction bearing Queen Elizabeth's unmistakable hand revealed that Catherine, and only Catherine, had been named as the sole guardian of a private royal directive, Camilla reportedly stared at the words in disbelief. The fury didn't come instantly. At first there was silence. Then, according to staff present that day, Clarence's house became the epicenter of an emotional earthquake. Slamming doors, raised voices. Camilla's confrontation with Charles was not gentle, nor was it rehearsed. Behind locked doors, she demanded an explanation he didn't seem ready to give. "She's not even queen," she reportedly snapped. Why would Elizabeth do this? The hurt behind the words was unmistakable, but so was the challenge they carried. For Camilla, it wasn't just an insult, it was a rejection, a clear dismissal of her role, her loyalty, her sacrifices. And more than anything, it was a reminder that some doors within the monarchy would never fully open for her. No matter how long she stood knocking, her inner circle scrambled. In the days that followed, press advisors worked overtime to reshape the narrative. Sources close to the Queen consort began quietly suggesting the instruction was symbolic, irrelevant to current structures, or possibly even misinterpreted. But the desperation was showing. Within the palace, few believed those words weren't carefully crafted by the Queen, and even fewer believed they weren't meant to send a message. The Queen had made her decision, and it wasn't Camilla. Rumours began to spread that Camilla had threatened to withdraw from royal duties entirely, a temporary retreat perhaps to reassess her role, as one aide delicately put it. Though no official confirmation surfaced, her absence from scheduled events only added fuel to the fire. Tensions continued to build, but the public facade was still in place until a joint appearance with Catherine days later. What was supposed to be a routine engagement turned icy. The body language told its own story. A shared glance, cold and brief. No warmth, no solidarity, just silence thick enough to slice through. For Catherine, the silence may have been deliberate. She said nothing, did nothing to provoke. But her mere presence, under the weight of the Queen's declared trust, spoke volumes. Camilla, surrounded by her own history of struggle, now stood at a crossroads, and she knew it. The question was no longer whether she felt betrayed. The question was what she would do next. But while Camilla reeled, another royal quietly stirred, someone with more to lose, and perhaps even more to reveal. She didn't shout, she didn't storm out, but Princess Anne's silence spoke louder than words. For a woman whose loyalty to the monarchy is unshakable, the instruction naming Catherine alone was a personal affront. And Anne doesn't forget. For over 5 decades, Anne had embodied unwavering service. While others faltered under public scrutiny or personal scandal, she remained steadfast, rarely praised, often overlooked but never absent. To those inside the palace, she was the monarchy's iron spine. And yet, when Queen Elizabeth's private instructions surfaced, Anne's name was nowhere to be found. The omission stung not because Anne sought recognition, but because she had earned it. Those who witnessed her leave the emergency palace meeting after the documents reveal say she didn't utter a single word, but her expression, stony and unreadable, left no doubt. Something had broken. She cancelled her next scheduled engagement, one she had attended for 20 years without fail. No explanation was offered, no statement released. And from that silence, speculation grew. Royal observers noted a subtle shift in her schedule, a recalibration of her alliances. The Princess Royal, long considered apolitical within the family drama, was beginning to chart a path of her own. A secret meeting with Edward and Sophie raised eyebrows, not because it was unusual for siblings to speak, but because of the timing and the urgency. Witnesses say the conversation was clipped, serious, and closed door. Behind the scenes, Anne wasn't just brooding, she was preparing. For years, she had been the Queen's most reliable confidant, and now, cut out of a defining document, she was faced with a question she never expected to ask. Had her loyalty been misjudged, or worse, quietly dismissed? While others reacted publicly or emotionally, Anne began to maneuver quietly, with precision. She didn't confront Catherine. She didn't dispute the Queen's will. Instead, she began strengthening her position, building subtle bridges with figures long outside her usual sphere, including members of the diplomatic service and even certain palace staff, often ignored by the upper echelons of power. The palace knew Anne well enough to be concerned. Her calm was rarely surface level, it was the eye of a storm. Those who've worked with her say when Anne goes quiet, it means she's preparing to act. And in a family defined by optics and order, a silent move can be more dangerous than a public outburst. No one knew where Anne stood, but they knew she was no longer standing still. What had once been dismissed as a minor rift was now something far deeper. Anne was not just excluded, she had been sidelined. And for a woman who had spent a lifetime upholding the crown without asking for glory, the betrayal was as sharp as it was silent. Yet as tensions rose, Anne made no appeal to Charles, no public show of protest. She would not give anyone the satisfaction. But one thing was now certain: she would not forget. She would not forgive. And she would not remain idle. As Anne plotted in silence, William was forced to confront the growing fracture and a rising pressure that would soon engulf him. What do you do when the mother of your children is thrust into the center of a royal storm and your own father's legacy begins to crumble? Prince William was faced with an impossible choice, and the clock was ticking. The revelation had landed like a thunderclap, and William was right at the heart of it. On one side stood his father, King Charles, the monarch whose reign he was sworn to support, the man who had waited his entire life for the crown. On the other, his wife, Catherine, now carrying the full weight of the Queen's final directive, a directive that had shaken the monarchy and exposed fractures too deep to ignore. For William, this wasn't just a family matter, it was a crisis of identity, of legacy, of loyalty. Those close to him described sleepless nights, private meetings behind closed doors, and long walks taken alone through palace gardens as EWR. Estled with the gravity of it all, sources reveal that William turned to his most trusted advisors during these days of silent turmoil. Late-night calls, whispers behind palace curtains, and a series of confidential discussions point to a man desperate for clarity, in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar. And in one particularly intimate moment, overheard only by a discreet aide, William reportedly asked a question that cut through all the noise. Why now? It wasn't a cry of anger. It was exhaustion, pain, a need to understand why the Queen would place this burden on Catherine's shoulders at a time when unity was so fragile. Privately, Catherine remained calm, always composed, but behind that steadiness, she urged caution. She knew the storm that brewed around her wasn't just political, it was personal, and she feared for William, who bore the weight of 2 dynasties and the expectations of a country watching his every move. She asked him to wait, to let the truth speak before they did. But William was not built for silence. The strain was showing. Insiders claim he began drafting a statement, a rare public gesture that would acknowledge Catherine's role while reaffirming loyalty to his father. But even that caused division. Some warned it would appear as betrayal to Charles. Others feared it would inflame tensions with Camilla beyond repair. The pressure was mounting, and it was coming from every direction. Senior staff urged restraint. Younger aides pushed for transparency. Family members, each guarding their own interests, leaned in with quiet influence. Every move William considered felt like a trap. If he remained silent, he risked appearing weak. If he spoke, he risked tearing the family even further apart. In his personal journal, now locked away in Kensington Palace, one line reportedly stands out: "She heard the Queen's whisper, and now I must decide if I will echo it." A sentence that captured both the weight of the Queen's faith in Catherine and the silent demand now pressing down on her husband. But silence would not hold for long. While William hesitated in the shadows of legacy and love, the outside world was beginning to stir. Leaks began to drip from the palace walls. Reporters caught the scent. And once the public caught wind of the storm brewing behind royal gates, the narrative spun out of control. Why? William's hesitation hanging in the air, the public finally got wind of the storm, and what came next changed everything. Once the royal instruction hit the press, it was no longer a private storm, it was a global hurricane. Leaks, headlines, divided loyalties. And the question on every tongue, why only Catherine? It started with a headline buried deep in the politics section of a UK tabloid, a leaked document, an anonymous source, and one explosive claim: Queen Elizabeth had left a secret instruction naming Catherine and Catherine alone as guardian of the monarchy's future. Within hours, it dominated every front page. News anchors interrupted regular broadcasts. Talk shows speculated wildly. Royal watchers dissected every sentence of the reported leak with surgical precision. Buckingham Palace had faced media storms before, but nothing like this. This wasn't scandal born of rumour. This was conflict born of truth. And it struck at the core of the monarchy's foundation. Within 24 hours, #CatherineChosen was trending across social media. Supporters hailed her as the people's future queen, graceful, modern, dignified. Memes, tributes, and threads poured in from across the globe. But not all voices were celebratory. Another faction quickly rallied behind Camilla, accusing the media of orchestrating a character war, of pitting women against each other in a fabricated battle for legacy. Commentators lined up on both sides. Some argued the Queen's instruction meant nothing now that Charles sat on the throne. Others insisted it was a constitutional earthquake in disguise, a rebuke of the present order by the very woman who had built it. Television debates turned bitter. Journalists combed archives, pulling years of footage for clues. Every past interaction between Elizabeth and Catherine was now under forensic review. Had there been signals, warnings? Was to bois? Is the Queen's way of bypassing what she feared the institution could not face head-on? Royal correspondents began to speak more freely about long-whispered tensions. Rumours of disagreements between Charles and his mother in her final months resurfaced. Camilla's inner circle scrambled to refute claims, calling the document ceremonial and misinterpreted. But the damage had already been done. And yet, amid the chaos, Buckingham Palace said almost nothing. A carefully worded statement was released, vague, neutral, and ultimately meaningless. It acknowledged the Queen's personal reflections, but emphasized that no such directive holds binding influence over the current structure of the monarchy. But no one believed that was the full story. The silence from within the palace only fueled more speculation. And more than ever, the public wanted a voice not from the press, not from officials, but from the woman at the heart of the storm. Catherine had said nothing. Not a whisper, not a flinch. But as pressure mounted, so did the need for clarity. Allies called for her to speak. Critics demanded it. Even her most loyal supporters began to wonder what she would say and what it would mean. The silence had become deafening, and it was clear, when Catherine finally chose to break it, the entire world would be listening. But while the media played its game, one voice had yet to be heard, and when Catherine finally spoke, she stunned even her closest allies. After weeks of silence, Catherine stepped into the spotlight, and the world held its breath. No palace script, no royal handlers, just one woman standing at the edge of a storm, choosing her words with gravity and grace. It wasn't a press conference nor a royal announcement. It happened during what should have been a quiet, low-profile charity visit, an appearance Catherine had committed to, long before the storm had erupted. And yet it was in this unassuming setting, surrounded by volunteers and flashing cameras, that she finally addressed the question echoing across nations. The moment arrived not with grandeur, but with conviction. As the press pack stirred and the murmurs began, Catherine turned calmly toward the audience, paused, and spoke the words that would shift the tide. "I didn't ask for it, but I won't ignore it." A sentence delivered with dignity but layered in meaning. It wasn't just an acknowledgement of the Queen's secret instruction. It was a declaration of quiet acceptance, of responsibility. Lip readers, trained and amateur alike, noted the faint tremor in her voice, a signal that despite her poise, emotion simmered just beneath the surface. This wasn't calculated. This was personal. And it resonated. In that moment, the speculation, the headlines, the whispered feuds dissolved into something more human. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, it was reverent. Soft at first, then swelling into something cathartic. In that applause there was relief, admiration, even forgiveness. But within palace walls, the reaction was more complicated. Some members of the royal family remained visibly unmoved. A stone-faced Camilla reportedly left the room before the applause began. Others maintained a veneer of indifference, careful not to reveal whether they interpreted Catherine's words as humility or defiance. But one truth had become undeniable: the Queen's final whisper had become a national conversation, and Catherine had chosen to stand within it, rather than retreat behind it. Her message was not about power, it was about duty. She spoke of legacy, of the responsibility that comes when trust is given without request. She emphasized unity over division and service over symbolism. And perhaps most importantly, she made no attempt to leverage the moment. No claim to title, no challenge to Camilla or Charles, just a reaffirmation that she would honor the Queen's memory not by taking, but by carrying whatever that meant, and however the future unfolded. And in that clarity, something shifted. Public opinion, once divided by media spin and royal politics, began to realign. Catherine was no longer seen as just a recipient of favor, she was a woman navigating a minefield. LD with grace. A visionary born not from ambition but from restraint. She became, in the eyes of many, both the victim of palace machinations and the beacon of what the monarchy could be. Not a queen by title, but a leader by presence. But even as the dust settled around her, one final move remained, and it would come not from Catherine, but from King Charles himself. He had delayed long enough. With a nation divided, a family splintered, and his crown under scrutiny, King Charles emerged from behind the palace gates. What he said and what he didn't will echo through royal history forever. Behind palace walls, the pressure on Charles had been mounting for weeks as the Queen's secret instructions spread like wildfire. And Catherine's composure captivated the public. The king's silence began to weigh heavily on the institution itself. Those closest to him described a man torn between two legacies, the one he inherited and the one he would leave behind. For days he avoided cameras, limited appearances, and refused to entertain media inquiries. But inside the palace, something was quietly brewing. He summoned his most trusted advisors, senior aides, and two high-ranking members of the clergy to a private council. There, behind closed doors and away from the cameras, the king made his decision. The following morning, the announcement came not through a press release, but from the throne room itself. In a carefully orchestrated ceremony, King Charles introduced the formation of a new royal council, a modern advisory body tasked with steering the crown's public and philanthropic mission into the next generation. And at its head, by personal appointment, stood the Princess of Wales, Catherine. Her name was not listed among others, but read first clearly, and with unmistakable emphasis. This was no symbolic nod. This was authority, transferred not in title, but in tea. What captured attention almost as much as the announcement itself was who wasn't there. Camilla, Queen Consort, was notably absent. No statement. No explanation. Her chair at the ceremony remained empty, and her name went unmentioned throughout the event. Whispers began immediately. Some claimed it was illness, others suggested protest, but to the public it didn't matter. The image was indelible: Charles, alone, reshaping the monarchy in his mother's shadow. During his address, the king made a quiet yet powerful reference. In times of doubt, I often return to my mother's wisdom, and it was her vision, not mine, that foresaw the path we walk today. A single sentence that acknowledged the Queen's instruction without debate, without defense, and without apology. It was a public surrender to her foresight, and an admission that her final act had changed everything. After the ceremony, an emotional moment unfolded. As the guests departed and the cameras dimmed, Charles approached Catherine and paused. Those present say nothing was said aloud, but that the king's eyes brimmed with something rare, vulnerability. The two shared a quiet embrace, brief but sincere. It was the first visible gesture of unity since the entire ordeal had begun, and in that moment, the fracture that had threatened to split the family seemed, if not healed, at least acknowledged. Later that evening, the instruction itself was formally archived, catalogued in the royal records, authenticated, and made public for historical record. No more speculation, no more mystery. The Queen had named Catherine, and now the monarchy had accepted it. The monarchy has endured war, scandal, and betrayal, but nothing quite like this. As Catherine steps into a role she never asked for, the royals must now reckon with a future shaped not by protocol, but by a promise whispered in a queen's final breath. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.